Hey, White Sox fans, it's Brett Ballantini. I am hosting the Southside Sox Mothership podcast. It's number 49, 49 podcasts already. And this is another of our sort of special editions. They're a lot of fun, sort of a get to know staff member at Southside Sox. We got a new guy we're going to talk with today and introduce you to. It's Tyrone Palmer. First of all, Tyrone, thank you for hopping on Southside Sox and for doing this podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be new, to be a part of the team.
You're hopping on at the right time because we got a first place White Sox team, but let's rewind. I'm thinking roughly 20 years or so. Let's talk a little bit about how you came to your White Sox fandom.
Yeah, so like growing up, like my mom was not a huge sports person at all. So I wasn't around a lot of sports as a kid. I just, wasn't something that was in my life. And then I remember my uncle took me to a Sox game, and he was the first person to ever kind of explain the rules, So I actually was like, oh, I get what's happening now. Although I feel like I remember I didn't quite get all the rules down. Like, right. I remember thinking that like fans were responsible for throwing the ball back to the players to like keep the play going, and so I didn't quite handle. But I remember as a kid, they were giving out pennants for the 100-year anniversary of the team. I remember Frank Thomas, who was the largest human being I had ever seen up until that point. I remember he hit a home run to like dead center field, and it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. And I was like, I love this sport. Mm-hmm. And I remember around the time I remember going to the library and going to they had like a baseball section and just checking out every baseball related book they had. I had handles of books. I sat at a table and just read them one after the other, and I was hooked.
For us intelligent baseball fans, at least, that is like a rite of passage. You go at a usually pretty young age, and you check. Usually, it's a lot of biographies where you're just checking out anything you can about baseball. And probably the skinnier the better, because then you can feel like you're learning a whole ton of stuff. I guess today maybe it's probably just like web pages. You're doing like Wikipedia or Baseball Reference or something. You're just going player after player.
Yeah, I remember there was like what's it called, like eyewitness books, which was like an encyclopedia that was a thin book, but it had a ton of knowledge. And I remember just going through that thing, and
I still probably have some of my foundational like baseball paperbacks, probably even still with me somehow. Boy, this is really how you come across the game. Now, your first game was in 2001.
Yeah.
So, and probably part of, as a kid, probably part of, because I know, even though my first experience was at an entirely different White Sox park, they still had the fireworks. It was still awe-inspiring, and the White Sox hit home runs in that first game. So a big part of that is just like the fireworks, the crazy hubbub that goes on just when you hit a home run. It being Frank, the largest human being, just killing a ball out to center field, does have to be you're almost like you can't not be a White Sox fan after that.
Yeah.
Now, I think another, or at least maybe like an all-time favorite, and I think this is something we actually share because I was lucky enough to be at the game as well. Awe-inspiring experience like really none other I've experienced before and since, and I have been at more White Sox games, or at least for a longer period of time than you, Tyrone, and that was the Blackout Game in 2008, an incredible memory.
Yeah, that was, to this day, the greatest game I've ever been to, for a lot of reasons. I think first off, I remember like that team I was very attached to, because like I was a White Sox fan in 2005, and I love that team. But also, like, I remember 2008, where before that season, my mom finally agreed to get me cable. I had been trying for years, because back before that, I could watch games on WGM, which I think are on like Saturdays. But right. But 2008, I remember being able to watch every game, and I was super invested in that team. And it was an odd team, but I remember, and that game was, I remember getting tickets the night before, and it was such an odd experience too, because I like baseball. One of the reasons I love baseball is it's typically laid back, and it's every game up until I'd been to that. It's, it's obviously you want the team to win and stuff, but people are kind of distracted during the game. It's kind of a leisurely affair, but that game, it's like, oh, everyone is locked in every single pitch. I remember anytime the count got to 2 strikes, people just started standing, and it was, it was loud, and it was just, and then it was just such a well-played game. And another home run hit to center field,
Yeah.
which, you know.
Yeah, really, this is a theme with you.
Yeah.
The thing that I think really among many things that stands out to me, and maybe you as well, is today. I mean, when I came into fandom, my first game, Tyrone, 1977. So I've been watching games a little bit longer than you. But I mean, back then, of course, there was a lot more grab ass nature of baseball. Today, even in this century, even going back that far, 13 years now, there's I'm going to use the word contrived. There's a lot more contrivance to everything. You have your you have the promotion that's been set maybe for months. You have the introduction music. There's so much you can count on that it can start to become almost a two rote. The idea that the White Sox were playing a tiebreaker game, first of all, that they didn't back into it, but they beat three different teams on 3 consecutive days to get there. The fact that the promotion itself, there's no branding. They literally like knocked off.
Yeah, it was. I still have my towel from that day.
As we do, it's like they knocked over like a Bed Bath and Beyond semi and just said, okay, we're going to take these 20,000 black towels and just hand them out, and people are going to go nuts for it. And they did. I mean, you remember looking up during really throughout that game, just people going nuts with. And I mean, all right, it's getting a little, it's getting a little soccer, maybe getting a little weird, getting a little college sports. But I mean, the idea that everybody was that unified, so fired up, and that there wasn't like a stamp on it, like even the World Series run, they had the trend was the thunder sticks, and there was a goofy like thunder stick. Everybody was hitting I mean, the fact that it was just like sort of like, hey, you guys want a towel? It's black. We've never done this before. Let's just wave black towels. There's this weird like charm to that game.
Yeah, and I remember like beforehand they like announced like, hey, everybody wear black, and it was like again like everyone had just gotten tickets the day before, and it had like near 100% participation, because I remember they tried to continue that into the playoffs, and then I remember opening day the next year they tried to do like, we're going to do another like blackout thing, and some people did it, some people didn't, but it was amazing to have like just that many people be like, oh, okay, all right, we'll do it.
Yeah, you are right. And when you look at photos or even at the timing at the game, there was it had to be a good 90% plus. You really didn't see much that wasn't, certainly not white, maybe just a dark color. But I think my dad didn't want to go. He thought he was going to be bad luck. So my wife went with me, and, we're all decked out, and, she's a good luck charm. So that was an extraordinary game. And, like I end up talking with people, oftentimes I end up being at the same games with people in some of their most memorable ones. One thing you're going to learn, and I should tell listeners and the few who are watching that, of course, Tyrone's Meet the Players is going to be running along with this podcast. So you're going to get a chance, if we don't cover it in this chat, to learn a little bit more about him reading, that form. One thing that comes up in that form was a love of cheesy 1980s hip hop. And I'm going to let you talk about that a little bit, Tyrone. But the one thing I do want to let you know, because it doesn't seem like many people remember this, and either I made it up and it's the cleverest thing ever, or the dopiest thing ever, or it really did happen, and I think it did. Before there was ever walk-up music, when Frank came up, of course, he was a huge phenomenon, right? And there was no such thing as walk-up music then. I mean, Nancy would maybe play a routine type of thing, maybe for some players. Usually it was mocking the other team, right? But the one thing I remember was she would play, I imagine it was just a button on her organ, but she would play this, like the drum fill from Tone Loc, A Wild Thing. It would always be doom, 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 and it was so incongruous for baseball. It was so goofy, and I don't know, maybe Frank wanted that, or maybe she just thought it. But I remember it. I hope somebody else can validate this memory. I do think it happens. I'm pretty sure you can hear it if somehow tune into, like, I guess it would be 1990 games or certainly 89. And knowing that this was maybe a weak spot for you, I thought I would at least share that story, because that was really probably the first walk-up music I ever remember. And it was, delightfully, it had a good cheese factor. I know at the time it was supposed to sort of like badass, but, looking back at it now, it's like, that was Frank Thomas's first walk-up music.
I will say that one of my favorite things about going to games, especially when it was Nancy, was just listening to all the different things she would come up with for opposing players, and just all the obscure references. That used to just be a game I would play where I was trying to figure out, okay, where does this song come from? Like, why is she playing it?
Yeah, because sometimes it really was like a puzzle. Sometimes it's plainly obvious, and sometimes it's like, all right, hold on, I think I know the title. How is this relating to the guy who's coming up to the plate? And of course, it was usually chiding or a little derogatory toward the opposition. But yeah, she was always a lot of fun to listen to. Okay, I guess I got to ask you, because it's another thing that comes up in the Meet the Player survey, and that is old school Simpsons fan. So I guess I got to ask what a favorite episode, or I don't know, character. Might be too easy, but it's a favorite episode.
I mean, I have so many. I love the softball episode, Homer at the bat. I love the monorail episode. Just I mean, there, I don't know, there's so many that I love, because I think that the Simpsons is probably the show I have seen the most amount of times, and I also saw it at such like a formative time of my life that it's kind of like, I'm not even sure if the Simpsons are funny or if like that's just how I like it completely wrote my sense of humor.
Right.
Like that.
Oh, sure.
Sure.
Yeah, you definitely hit on a couple of my favorites. And of course, the fact that there is even any connection at any time to baseball. Of course, you have the episode where Homer's the mascot. Hunger strike. So all right.
Actually, speaking of baseball, I went to a game in the Albuquerque Isotopes, and they actually have like a lot of, they have like Simpsons stuff there, which is kind of a fun little crossover.
You come on, you gotta lean into that, especially because it's probably gonna get you a little bit of scratch. Otherwise, like, all right, Isotopes, whatever. But yeah, you work the Simpsons and get that permission for sure. Okay, let's see. Oh, I guess before we maybe take a break and talk a little bit more, the White Sox team itself, let's talk about a little bit of what sort of fan you consider yourself, Tyrone, and the sorts of maybe contribution at Southside Sox you think you're going to make. Are you a little bit more of an analytical writer? Are you a little bit more of a blustery, yelling, colorful fan? I mean, because we have all sorts here.
I mean, I like to think I could combine the two. I don't know. I think I'm always somewhat more on the analytical side, just in terms of like, I don't know, when like I have a question, trying to like, I wonder why this is, and then usually trying to research and try to figure out why it is. Like I feel like of late I've been like looking into like pitcher spin rates, just because I'm like curious, Like I was at the game yesterday and I was curious, okay, what is Garrett Crochet's spin rate doing right now? Because I was, I noticed his miles per hour down a little bit, and I was, and I think is at least baseball lets you kind of look into stuff like that. But I tend to lean more towards that side, although I can definitely get fiery and blustery,
Hey, you had the Blackout Game. It was formative. Come on.
It's true. Well, I think too, for me, anyone who knows me, I'm a very like laid back person, and I always feel like sports, and especially baseball, is like my avenue to just yell at the screen and just, like that's where I get my anger out.
I don't think you're alone there. I think there's a number of people. I might consider myself along those same lines. Sure. Because especially with this team, it's
also, well, it was in a weird way, the rebuild was nice, because you kind of are like, well, they're building towards the future, and like individual games don't matter that much, and it kind of made everything a little bit more relaxed, whereas now it feels like every game it's so much more stressful, and the wins are more fun. So I definitely, I like that, but it's something where I think when, they make decisions I don't agree with, or like that, it definitely is way more frustrating.
Well, Tyrone, speaking of decisions we don't agree with, I think we're going to get to that in just a second. We're going to take a quick break. If you do happen to be watching us on YouTube, just freeze your screen for a second, because nothing's going to happen. But for the rest of you listening on the podcast, you're going to hear a message or two. We will be right back in just a minute with the second half of Southside Sox podcast, number 49, with Tyrone Palmer. Hey, White Sox fans. My name is Brett Valentini. I'm hosting Southside Sox podcast number 49, and I'm lucky enough to have a guest who is a new member to Southside Sox. It's Tyrone Palmer. Thanks again for joining us, joining the staff, and for joining me on this podcast.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
All right, we have learned, we've got a lot of your back of the baseball card stats and bioinformation out of the way. That was the first half of this program. We're going to focus a little bit more on the White Sox team itself, which is something we cannot help but do every time we have a Southside Sox podcast. And I do want to, because we haven't got a chance to talk to you yet, Tyrone, and this is a big season. The window of contention is clearly open. There are a lot of hopes, a lot of breath held, and right at the beginning of the offseason, we had a big change with the manager, and then we had an offseason where there were, I guess you could say, a little bit of splash, but I think left a number of fans wanting. So I guess I'm going to start by asking you just what your assessment of what your expectations of the offseason were and how well they were met.
So I don't know. I think clearly this was like the first year, or going into the year, it was kind of like we could win the World Series if everything breaks right. And so for me, I was kind of hoping for them to address some of the holes with things that weren't question marks. So that's where I kind of, so I was hoping that they would spend a bit more than they probably did. And so I feel like I was a bit let down a little bit by the offseason, because I think, like, you think of things like right field, which has been a hole for forever since Jermaine died, I guess. It's been, and so and it was one of the things where they kind of replaced it with a guy who can't really stay healthy. It was more of a bargain kind of pick. And I think, I always kind of hope that they'll like shop the top of the market, and I feel like outside of relief pitching, they never seem to do that. Yeah, and I mean, I like Liam Hendricks. I like him. He seems like a good person, and I enjoy watching him pitch. So I'm not upset that they signed him, but it's kind of, it's one of the things where I think there were other places I was like, I think they could have went a bit harder at, although some of the things worked out. Like, I think I was definitely not necessarily a big fan of bringing Rodon back, and that was a very wrong opinion that I had. So, and I think, I wasn't crazy about like just giving Dylan Cease the rotation spot, but he's definitely earned it. So, it's something where I'm hopeful that, they might be, willing to trade for some of the positions that they didn't address in the offseason. But
yeah, I think what's challenging with the White Sox is, it's been hammered into, well, I'll say both of us for the entirety of our fandom, even though mine stretches back further than yours, that there's limited funds. And I think most fans probably do begrudgingly accept that. Or whether or not you do, it makes it even more important that you spend wisely. And even the Liam Hendricks, though, you could argue that was wise spending. It was putting really all of your free agent money, essentially all of your free agent money in an offseason, into the one spot where there probably was the least urgency to address. Of course, we've seen how the season's turned out, where they really rolled the dice and got lucky with the rotation. So what seemed like an outrageous dereliction of duty turned out to be like, well, so far so good. And the bullpen has seemed maybe a little shakier than we would have thought. So maybe the Hendrick, maybe that was really, really necessary. But the idea that you're going to go out and throw $8 million at Adam Eaton on like the first day of winter meetings, as if somehow he was going to get snapped up for more somewhere. It just very strange. The inconsistency, and we're going to get to another inconsistency in just a second, but the inconsistency is what's frustrating, I think, as a fan, because you think, okay, if these are the rules, all right, let's see how you play by them. And it's not to say you can just, this isn't a rotisserie game. This isn't fantasy baseball where you just pick the guy you want, or wait to draft him in free agency. But the idea that they say one thing and they execute so differently can just be, it does make you want to throw your hands up sometimes.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's tough, because I think, I think, at least from what I've seen, there's very few times when they get like a ton of added value from players. Like, I think of like I look at like certain teams that are really well run, like, I don't know, the Tampa Bay Rays and the Dodgers, and they both, aside from the Dodgers having gobs of money to throw at people, they also are really good at turning like so-so prospects into a lot of value. Whereas I think with the White Sox, they haven't shown themselves to be very good at that, which is why, you look at like their glut of like all of the outfield prospects that they've had over the years that have just fizzled out. And it's so I think for them especially, it's hard when you're not great at development, and you're also not willing to spend for elite talent. It kind of just makes it so it just is hard to put a top line major league roster, at least with any sort of regularity.
Yeah, and as much as it's frustrating to see the White Sox sort of shop, well, certainly not shop it's far from the top of the market, but even arguments can be made, hey, even with what they did in terms of just like picking up Jake Lamb, which is a ridiculous move. Well, okay, he's been a positive enough player. It's like, okay, they're not like losing a ton of money there. You know, sometimes knowing what they do when they do spend, because even Liam Hendricks is going to be hard to pay off that contract in terms of his value. Sometimes you almost want to say, okay, maybe don't shop at the top of the market because you guys sort of make weird decisions with your professional scouting. And maybe it is best that you sort of dumpster dive because then it can only hurt you. So Nomar Mazara can only hurt you so much. You're out $5 million and everybody gets frustrated, but it's not a commitment to a guy that you completely, blew your gut feeling on. And now you're hooked to him for 3-4 years. That's a ridiculous way for a fan to have to think. But the truth is, it's really touch and go whether we have to think that way because they haven't proven themselves as much as you can say, well, man, everything's right. Billy Hamilton was great when he was active. Brian Goodman's come up and actually, been somewhat of a positive player. That's not how the Chicago White Sox should be attacking the market and filling out their roster. And the fact that we're having to sort of like golf clap the notion that, okay, these weird moves that just sort of fell into their lap are working out okay. And I mean, we still got a lot of season to play. That's frustrating that we sort of have to be happy with that. The other big move in the offseason, and another thing that was a zag when we anticipated and were told the White Sox were going to zig was the hiring of Tony La Russa. And I think by and large, it's been panned. Certainly at the time it was panned. There are folks now you'll talk to who will say, well, look at the record, how can you complain? Or he's a manager of the year. I believe Scott Greger in the Herald said Tony La Russa was a manager of the year candidate, which I can't fathom. But I think by and large, certainly in the offseason, most people are like, what is going on with that? And I'm going to guess you fall in line with that, but I'm interested to know what your take on hearing first, maybe the rumors, which I think most of us said, this is a very strange prank. This isn't April, so I don't know what's going on here. And then when it actually came true.
Yeah, it was, well, I remember when I first saw it, I think it was because it was Bob Nightingale who I think first reported it, and it was, which made me think that initially I was like, well, it's not true because clearly the Sox would never do this. But since Bob is like Jerry's chosen reporter, clearly this is just him doing a favor. I was like, that was what I thought. I was just like, that is clearly what it is. And then slowly it became like, oh no, this is actually happening. Which I think for a while, I couldn't process it. That is what they would choose to do because I feel like, for the most part, every step of like the rebuild up until now, they've done really well. They've done kind of the thing you'd expect them to do, And so this was the first time where it felt like clearly like Jerry meddling in a way where, because I think initially it was like they weren't sure they were going to rebuild because it was like, well, Jerry might not want to rebuild, and eventually they had to like convince him to get there, but he did, and it's like, okay, Jerry's kind of letting Rick Hahn do what he does, and so. But now it's like, nope, he's forcing his manager onto the team. And so I think, so for a lot of reasons, I wasn't a fan of it. One, I'm not a huge fan of Tony La Russa as a person necessarily. And I think it's also a hard sell when it's just someone hasn't been managing for, a long time. And I think, we've seen, especially baseball, it changes drastically from year to year, even what strategies are effective, and like, I mean, there was even a case, early this year of like Tony La Russa not knowing a rule, which is one of those things where, I mean, this is his first year back since that rule has been a thing. So it's kind of, it makes sense. Maybe he wouldn't know it. And, so I think it was just kind of a weird fit, and I'm still not crazy about it. It's also, I think, a testament to baseball where managers, for the most part, I don't think matter that much. I think there's a limit to how much you can, at least in any specific game, you can really hurt your team. So I think on some level, I mean, I think that's why it's kind of funny to me where people are saying, oh, maybe he'll win manager of the year. And I think if he does win manager, that'll be like just the kind of testament to that theory that managers don't matter that much. Because, and I think, Yeah, but I think I think too, the frustrating thing is, I think ideally the way it's supposed to work is the general manager hires the manager. That way you kind of have consistency with like how you're building the roster and how you're managing the roster, at least to have some level of consistency there. And I mean, even with like the, signing of Liam Hendriks, the only way he's potentially worth the amount of money you're giving him is if he's more than just a, push button. Okay, we have a save situation, he pitches. And if it's not a save situation, he doesn't. Like, no, he needs to be your kind of, it's a high leverage situation. We're throwing him out there reliever. And that was not what Tony La Russa saw him as. And so I think that's just one example of like, okay, clearly, not everyone's on the same page here.
Yeah. It's funny to think too, because you think of a young manager or maybe a player who's just turned manager as needing a bench coach who's sort of going to be that guy who's going to show him the ropes. And in this case with La Russa, I think one thing that could have smoothed this out better was having a bench coach who could have been that conciliary, again, whether maybe he was younger, he was more engaged, whatever the compliment was going to be. And it still could have been a guy from the La Russa, bullpen, but a guy who was going to play. And for all we know, Miguel Cairo is doing that. He's obviously, he's not visible whatsoever. So we really know nothing about what he's, to my knowledge, I have no real clue about what his function is and what he does beyond, whatever the rote duties are. And I think that would have helped sell it a little bit as well. And of course, in the offseason, a guy like Miguel, who's not going to be getting, visible opportunities and not going to be interviewed and steal the thunder from Tony, you're not going to know that. The fact that even this deep into the season, we don't know what this coaching staff is. And we've had the situation like when Lucas Giolito, claimed post game that he was gassed, even though Ethan Katz had gone out and talked to him. Grandal's out there, who's, really probably the manager on the field. La Russa's in the dugout. Why? I mean, the very strange finger pointing that was going on there, that was odd. And again, maybe growing pains very early in the season, but I'm not really sure we see a well-oiled machine yet either. And if somehow there was a little bit of a, it's nice that Ethan Katz is there in terms of sort of like a little bit more new age, newer thinking, new experience in the game, influence. And Frank Menachino is sort of crazy and nuts. And I think he seems like a fun influence. I don't know necessarily if he's positive or negative, especially the offense is playing these days. Yeah. But Miguel Cairo is a real fulcrum here, and I don't know enough about him, and I don't get a lot of encouragement that he's sort of this like a steady hand or like a right hand man. And I guess we're not supposed to know that bench coaches are supposed to be invisible, but I think that would help mitigate the fact that it's like, where's this guy coming from? He's been out 10 years, and some of the mistakes made, like that rule that's something somebody should have caught. I mean, it's not necessarily even all on Tony. I mean, obviously the buck stops with him, but the situation with Lucas and being and gassed, and there's been a number of them where it's like, oh, wait, is everybody are they scared of him? Is everybody sort of clocking out because he's a Hall of Famer and he keeps showing his ring or something? I don't really get the dynamic, but let's hope perhaps that your theory that managers don't really have much of an impact is the case, because I'm not sure we're going to have a positive impact this year.
And I think it's one of those things where I think, especially over the course of a regular season, I don't know if they matter as much, because I think a lot of the mistakes and stuff get kind of washed away by like variance and random stuff. But I think the hard part is when they matter, especially if like is in the playoffs, and that's when everything gets amplified. And that's one where, that might be an issue. But it's very odd too with the staff, because I really like the staff for the most part outside of Tony, but it's also like there's very little that comes out about them. I feel like they don't really talk to the public very much. And I think it was yesterday that like Dallas Keuchel was complaining about getting taken out of that game, and like there's been numerous times where pitchers have complained about their usage. And I remember back when it was Cooper here, it was kind of understood that he was handling a lot of the pitching changes. Like he might as well have been the manager for at least the pitching component for a lot of years. And I assume that is definitely not Ethan Katz's role, but I don't know how much is his role. How much is he talking to Tony? What is their relationship like? And that's something that, we just don't know at this point.
Yeah, boy, I apologize for allowing Tony La Russa to dominate too big a portion of your debut podcast, Tyrone. But unfortunately, he is sort of like the black cloud that's hovering over this whole season, and it is sort of a drag. And I know this makes me open to criticism from other fans, including our readers of Southside Sox, for being too negative, to say that there's a little bit of a guilt factor in how this is going. And thankfully, there's been like a couple weeks where it seems like it's cooled down. Maybe even like, maybe we're pushing a month now since you're mean. I don't know that there's necessarily a major thing aside from what Dallas said just recently. You hate to sort of feel sort of guilty about what's going on here, and also sort of like look around the corner, like what is going to happen, because there's a part of me that still just thinks this whole thing is going to get torpedoed because it's just such a bizarre situation. And again, that's why I'm hoping that you're right and that a manager does have little to no impact, because I don't see how there's a positive impact to come out of having him for 162 games right now. Just run differential wise, you see the White Sox are underperforming the run differential, and how much that falls on the manager. I do a thing for the site with managerial war, which is also has not been positive by no means, not the worst, not Bevington level, but also not very good. But okay, speaking of that, let's snapshot as we sort of look. We assess the team now and look ahead to at least maybe between now and the All-Star break, if not the rest of the season. White Sox 45-32, 2.5 up on Cleveland. Been a first place team now for a significant period of time. Run differential plus 81, fifth in the game. That projects to a 99 win season. Would not be bad. Definitely would outpace most anybody's wildest desires before the season. That would put them 19 games, winning the division by 19 games over Cleveland. Nobody else in the AL Central, the awful AL Central, even has a positive run differential. It seems like it's going to be quite difficult for the White Sox not to win this division. If you just take their winning percentage, their pace is a 95 win season. Both of those, I think, are much better than most people would have thought going into the season. That said, the team has struggled. The offense is definitely in trouble. It's strange that the White Sox have what you would say maybe average amount of injuries. It's just so strangely balanced. The pitching staff has been lucky enough, we'll knock on wood again, that there's been almost nothing wrong with them. And it's really substantially hit, almost completely hit the offensive side. And we're really starting to see signs of that. People are saying Nick Madrigal was sort of the tipping point. And that, strange as it sounds, may be the case, because the offense has definitely not been the same since he's gone, piled on top of losing Eloy, piled on top of losing Luis Robert. And do you think that without an injection via trade, or maybe even from Charlotte, that the White Sox can sort of get their offensive mojo back? Let's just say short term, let's say between now and the 14-ish or so games, between now and the All-Star break.
It's hard because I think there's so many not great players that they have to play every day. I think it honestly feels very reminiscent of like during the rebuild years, where you had a couple of like, really great players, and then just a bunch of, random people, where I think it's just hard when you have to play Larry Garcia, you have to play Jake Lamb every day, you have to play, Danny Mendick, you have, and there's just, and it's especially when like Tim Anderson he's been okay, but he hasn't been up to what he was the past couple of years. Yohan Moncada is having a pretty good year, but it's, the power is just gone. And then Jose Abreu is scuffling right now, and he does this sometimes, so there's a chance that he just will get super hot the next few weeks and look like an MVP type player. But I think it's hard because, again, there just is no real like depth to the lineup, where I think at a certain point you just need, like, I think that was why so many people have been excited about like potentially getting like Eduardo Escobar, because he at least would be a major league caliber player, which for this lineup would be huge.
And still doesn't knock you down by any stretch. I mean, think about it, Tyrone. We're talking about really 4 legitimate, let's say, star level offensive players: Yasmani, Yohan, Tim, Jose. Really nobody else, healthy or not, Andrew Vaughn, too early. Yermin Mercedes, too early to call that. Zach Collins not stepped up in any way. And when it seems like when those guys are clicking well enough, and not to say that all 4 have been clicking consistent, when the Sox were hot, that they were all clicking. Obviously, Yasmani's had his weird, struggles. Jose's had a generally down year. But the pitching plus say 2 or 3 of those guys clicking is good enough to win at a nice clip. When fewer of those guys are clicking and the pitching even takes maybe a little step back, now you're seeing a team that's, maybe 500 team.
Yeah, I remember I saw a stat yesterday, and I can't remember it exactly, but it basically was that like the Sox this year have been essentially unbeatable when they score 4 runs or more. Like it's, you don't need this, at least as long as the pitching staff stays what it has been. The Sox don't need an amazing offense. They just, but the problem is right now they've been really bad, and it's weird too seeing a White Sox team that just doesn't hit home runs.
Yeah,
like, but just that in of itself is just odd.
Yeah,
where they are continually getting out homered by whoever they play.
Yeah. The margin of error, and again, thankfully, in a wider context in this AL Central, I mean the Twins. I mean we got the Twins coming in. Game postponed as we're talking now. We have 3 more games with the Twins. For some reason, I'm witnessing Twins fans starting to yap. They're 11 and a half games out of first place. They've had the most disappointing season by far of any team in the league. They're tied for 3rd place, which is also tied for last place. They're awful. They've had bad luck, but they're awful. So it's funny that they're yapping. It's funny that they're yapping. But the truth is, even a team. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I will say the Twins are where some of my like fan irrationality comes in, where I'm still a little afraid of them, and I know I shouldn't be. There's no logical reason. Like they would need to like play like 700 baseball. Basically,
yes, let me soothe you. Yes, I believe they have to win 2 out of 3 games just to get the 90 wins. Now, granted, 90 wins can easily win. It could be fewer than that could win this division, but that's a clip that's going to have to go through Chicago. It's going to have to still go through some decent teams. If they were just playing maybe Kansas City the rest of the way, I'd say, all right, maybe there's a chance. And of course there is a chance, but we're deep into the season. They want to say, there's still this many games, but the season's almost half over and you are stuck deep in last place. Now, of course, of those 3 teams tied for last place and 3rd place, of course, the Twins would pack the most fear into anyone. Of course, this is a team that's supposed to be a 90+ win team. But the point I was beginning to make before deciding to veer off the road and cheap shot the Twins was there does seem to be margin of error in terms of just getting this division, just getting into the playoffs. It's by no means a coast. It's by no means a gimme for the White Sox. But it seems like they're going to have to do a lot of work not to win it and not to be in position with Cleveland throughout the rest of the year. The problem is we have these 2 paths now as fans. We have to say, okay, there's the calm that we can feel over the likelihood that this team is going to be clearly in contention and probably in great position to make the playoffs. But then there's, okay, where do we go? Where do we go from there once we're in the playoffs? Because last year was disappointing. It was nice to be there. It was nice to win a first game. And then they went flat and they weren't up for it, even though on paper they probably were a better team than Oakland. You can foresee a very similar thing happening, and some of that isn't their fault because they had some key guys go down, but other teams have key guys go down too. And the idea that the White Sox are so close to being a team that's like not a factor at all once they get to the playoffs is frightening and frustrating because the window's open and the window doesn't last forever.
Yeah.
It's a situation where as much as you don't want to say the White Sox have to do something, and I know they're going to be somewhat limited in what they maybe can do, because they still do have core guys. I mean, you're not going to get 2 core outfielders when you've still got Eloy coming back and you've still got Luis coming back. I don't even know how hard you're going to dive into the second base market when Nick Madrigal is your guy. Adam Frazier, of course, can play all over the place. So, that helps and maybe makes that a legitimate acquisition or trade target. Or Eduardo, sort of a rental, glorified rental, not too high a cost. There's only so much the White Sox can do. And it's frustrating too, because, there's going to be some fan, maybe outrage, depending on what it is they do. I know the hands are tied a little bit. It's hard to preach patience when you're dealing with injuries like this. And it's going to be hard for Rickon to come out and say, well, the money was spent. The money was spent in rehab, getting Luis back. It's been rehab, getting Eloy back, and you sort of know you're going to hear that, and it's sort of depressing to know that's probably what we're going to hear in a month.
Yeah, and I think what scares me is I do feel like they're going to kind of view Eloy and Luis returning as like, that's like our acquisitions, and he's going to spin it as we acquired 2 all-stars at the trade deadline, and that's good. And I think with both of them, I'm not confident in how good they'll be when they come back, just because they both had kind of injuries that, like, Luis had an injury that tends to kind of linger even when they come back. Like, I mean, we're seeing that even with like hamstrings and stuff. Like, even we've seen like Adam Engel try to come back. It's been fits and starts. This idea that Luis Robert will come back and just be 100% and play the rest of the year. That seems risky. And then with Eloy, like, that's a weird non-baseball injury. I don't know how that'll affect his swing. I don't think anyone really knows. So, like, counting on either of them, it would be nice, and I hope they do come back, and that would be a wonderful like boost to the team. But also, I don't want the Sox to kind of operate just on the assumption that we're getting both of them back at 100%, just in time for the September run through the playoffs.
Yeah, it's a challenge. You got to juggle what you consider this future to be and this window contention to be, and the fact that you've committed significantly to both Eloy and Luis. But there is the matter of this year, and you're not going to get. I mean, they're not coming back tomorrow. If they can even come back, they're not coming back at full production tomorrow. And the matter of getting from tomorrow to, let's say, September 1st, let's say the playoffs, that's big. And, it isn't in the bank yet. I mean, it does seem like the 4 other teams do want to hand this division to the White Sox, but it's not in the bank. And the White Sox they seem determined maybe to make more of a race of it than they should. And let's hope that can recover, because this stretch to the All-Star break really is the time. It's been said in a couple podcasts already. This is the time to fatten up. This is by far the easiest streak of the season, or certainly the remaining season. Even though you can say the Twins are playing better, ooh, they're scary. Obviously the Mariners were playing better and proved it to the White Sox. Somehow they dropped 1 or 2 to the Pirates. Let's not start talking like, oh, well, the Tigers are playing better, so that's why they took title from the White Sox. This is a stretch where they need to be winning. Certainly majority of the games, if not double figure games, 10 out of the remaining 15 or 16, it's really got to be because they need to get a little fat going into the All-Star break, because they've got really until the start of September before they get any sort of breather. And I hate to think they're going to enter September like, deadlocked. I do hope Rick Hahn is able to somehow find a way to fortify this team just enough. It really can be as simple as just one guy. It doesn't even have to be a major guy. It could be Eduardo Escobar. Just enough of a boost, just to sort of stop the bleeding. It gives Tim Anderson a chance maybe to get his feet under him to start hitting the way he can, get a little more protection perhaps. It could just be that one piece. And so far, Rick Hahn's been pretty smooth in terms of, I don't know, Billy Hamilton, whatever. I'm not sure how that comes about, but all right, it did sort of fit there for a while. Let's hope he can keep that luck going, because he's been on a nice roll. I hope his luck doesn't run out, because we're in trouble if that's the case.
Yeah, and there's a lot. I don't know. I think it's hard because you kind of have to balance the trying to not shorten the window, but also understand that this is one of those years where you're getting contributions from all these players. Just that, the Sox typically don't, when they make bargain bin kind of additions to the roster. Usually it doesn't end up being like Billy Hamilton or Brian Goodwin, where it's like, oh, this is like an actual player. And then you have this pitching staff, which is far and away the best in baseball. And you're getting, career years from Carlos Rodon. And, we finally see Dylan Cease looking great. And you just, maybe the biggest question mark is Lucas Giolito, and that tells you how strong everything is. And I think pitching is really random sometimes in baseball, and so who knows what the rotation will look like next year or the year after. So it kind of is one thing too, where you want to strike when you have this amount of talent, and this level of pitching. Back in 2005, you had just a weird bullpen year where just everyone was great. And sometimes that just happens.
We've been so hyped about this notion, and I think you alluded to it when Jerry Reinsdorf was convinced to actually rebuild, instead of this sort of maybe halfway rebuild, sort of that Ken Williams influence of nope, don't ever give up the ship, keep pushing. That it's sort of been sold to us. Okay, this has been a legit rebuild. There were some painful years, and now we have a window, and that's great. I'm psyched like any fan would be. Like, man, this whole decade could be greatness for the White Sox, right? But that can also be a tagline. They could never get there. And that's this part, especially a season like this, like it starts to scare you a little bit because you've seen some things go wrong. Of course, we have next year where we don't even know if we're gonna have a season because of all the labor stuff, and all this spider tax stuff is certainly not necessarily helping that and revealing the hand of management. But then people don't like it on Southside Sox when I talk that way, so I'll stop talking that way. Like there's a conspiracy theory out there. But this window thing is as jazzed as I am as a fan. It's like, man, they're going to be good for years. Well, I don't want that to be the penalty. This drug they're giving us where it's like, well, just keep smiling because 2023 is our year. Of course, if they don't make it, okay, fine. Of course, it's no guarantee there's going to be World Series championships. But the idea that's just like, well, we're going to just keep punting. We're extending the window. It's like, well, okay, hold on. At a certain point, it's too early to call BS on it yet. But at some point, you got to say, all right, no, hold on. We got to win more than one playoff game. We got to dominate a season and maybe win the division by, 10 games instead of making it this nail biting thing. Too early to see how it projects. But I mean, there is this other side of this window, which sounds great. That's like, well, we're just never going to get there. It starts to sound like that thing that's been claimed, this attribution to Jerry Reinsdorf of like, it's best to be in second place every year and just not quite ever get there. I don't want the cheese just to keep getting dangled season after season. And I hope that Rick Hahn doesn't approach, as much as I don't envy where he's at in terms of, all right, what do I sacrifice this year? Or what do I sacrifice of the future for this year? It's a tough balance, but it can't just be like, I'm not going to touch the future because you don't know. The injuries alone this year have told you, you don't know. You don't know if Lucas Giolito's sticking around. You don't know if Liam Hendricks has another year after this. I mean, there is part of it that says, listen, you better press the metal and accelerate into the season because you lean in at 2.5 games up. At least you're in the mix. There's no guarantee in 2022 or 3 or 4 or 5 the White Sox are even a playoff team. So I hope he finds that balance.
Because I think too, I was looking at like in my 20 years of Sox fandom, I think there's been 2 teams before this one that I legitimately thought could win the World Series. And that was 05 and 06. Other than that, every team has kind of, even the teams that have done well there's always been kind of, they're not winning a World Series. And it's not as if I think that's been their entire franchise history. There haven't been a lot of shots they've had. And so I feel like this is a rare year. And so I think it is important to try to capitalize and not just, kind of say, well, next year, the year after that, because I mean, like I said, it's the pitching. Even if you look a couple years down the road, it's like, okay, maybe you've got Giolito, but then after that, it's okay, Dylan Cease, he's looked good for the first half of this year, but it's not like a huge track record there. You have Dallas Keuchel, and I'm not convinced how well he's going to age, and I mean, who knows? So it's and the Sox haven't shown me kind of any ability to draft and develop to kind of surround the core with sustainable talent. So for me, I'm kind of very much let's focus on this year and then hopefully win this year, and then we'll start thinking about a longer window,
I doubt losing Jake Berger's gonna haunt us. No offense to Jake. Losing Gavin Sheets is gonna haunt us. And even if they do blossom and become regular somewhere else, I mean, this is the Ken Williams approach, and he caught a lot of trouble for being the win now guy who's willing to cash out prospects, but very few of those prospects came back to haunt them. They do exist. And certainly he had a couple terrible deals, certainly the Gio Gonzalez deal and getting Nick Swisher and then get rid of Nick Swisher. I mean, there were some bad moments. He was not a perfect GM, but the general philosophy of push it, help the only team that matters is now 26 guys on the White Sox. Really, that's all it is. Those are the only guys contributing to White Sox wins. I don't disagree with that philosophy. I don't know how differently Rick Hahn takes it. I assume he's at least pretty much bought into that thinking, but you really have to. They're there now. You don't know you're ever going to get. The pitching stretch they just had, it may never happen again. It's already shown a little bit of crack. There've been, I don't know if it's spider tack stuff with the spin rates and all that. There's been a little bit of step back. They're still great and they're still healthy, which is almost as good as being great. But you don't know the second half of the season, there's not going to be just trouble after trouble, little, hopefully no big injuries, the little stuff where Lucas, he needs a couple weeks or some bullpen injuries, whatever it is. They've been very blessed. As much as they haven't been blessed on the offensive side, they've been blessed pitching, which, let's face it, is probably more important in this game. Come on. I mean, you got to cash that in. Don't kill guys, but this could be the only year. You do have to look at this as perhaps being the only year. I know that's sort of crazy things because we've been sold on this window. And of course, I believe they're going to be very strong for years to come, but you can't worry about, you have a season next year. So don't worry about those years. Let's win in 2021.
I also think, and it's kind of because, the Sox don't have a great farm system at this point. So they don't have any prospect that you can say if the Sox get rid of them, that will have any real tangible effect on the window. You hope guys like Jared Kelly and Matthew Thompson end up being reliable starters, but that's not, that's impossible to really forecast. And so, the Sox, I don't think whether or not they're good in 2025, 26, 27 is that you can't it's not going to be because they traded Jake Berger away.
Well, and the good news, Tyrone, as far as I know, they haven't changed the rules where it's not as if you spin a roulette wheel and you might only get 10 picks one year. You get the same full amount of picks. Now, granted, they're lower picks, okay. And there's a difference between a number 1 pick or a top 5 pick or top 10 pick than a 20th pick, like they're going to be picking this year. But you get the same amount of picks every year. You can sign as many free agents as you want. The White Sox don't even have a second rookie team. You can add another team. You can get guys to play for your team. It's not like somehow if you win a championship, you got to punt the draft for the next year. You can keep those guys running out there because there are going to be other Jared Kellys and Matthew Thompsons and Jake Bergers and Micker Adolfo's. And, I guess we'll see. I think we're on the same page in that we do want to see him go for it, and certainly things are looking really good right now. And Tyrone, you've hopped on at the right time. You're hopping on to Southside Sox when the White Sox in first place, and that's been a hard time. If you're trying to jump into that jump rope line, it hasn't really come up very often, as you know, over the last 20 years. It's been sort of rare to be able to jump on at this sort of time. So it's very good timing for us here. You know. So it is good to have you. Thank you for taking some time to join us. Introduce yourself a little bit to everybody. Again, accompanying this will be the Meet the Players for Tyrone Palmer. So you get to learn a little bit about him with a couple things maybe we didn't cover in this podcast. And of course, you get his thoughts on what's led up to this season and how this season is going. I hope certainly sooner than later, we'll have you on another podcast, group situation or one-on-one with me so we can talk more about the team. And hopefully we'll be talking still even happier times. We will have somehow padded the 2.5 game lead, and we are just inevitably marching toward some postseason play for the first time in, well, I guess we'll count 2020, but for real, more years than I'd like to think. Boy, back to
the first time
back to a blackout game. Yikes! Wow.
Yeah, and the first time back-to-back playoff appearances ever.
Yeah.
So
I'll try to make the asterisk for that one very faint on site, but yeah, I'll still throw the asterisk. I think we got to go 21-22 before I really feel good about that. But yeah, let's just keep getting there, and then we can talk about the 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 year streak. That's what I want to be talking about. I know that's what you want to be talking about too.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Thanks everybody for listening, always for reading. We got more and more content. The content is coming on our ears. You see, even on a day where we have a game postponed, we've got full, fresh block of stories up, the top 6 on site. We're going to continue to be giving that to you with additional writers and voices like Tyrone hopping on. So thank you always for reading, for even listening. Sometimes even watching. Thanks. This is Southside Sox podcast number 49. Thank you, Tyrone, for joining us, and let's do this again real soon.
Yeah, definitely.